The biting wind tore across the barren fields, a relentless sculptor of ice and misery. Winter had clamped its jaw shut on the land, promising only hardship and silence. Eliza pulled her threadbare shawl tighter, the rough wool doing little against the chill that seemed to seep into her bones. The small farm, a lonely scar on the vast, white landscape, felt less like a home and more like a cage of ice. Since Henry was taken by the fever, the silence had grown to fill the space he left behind, heavy and suffocating. She was alone, the weight of the land and the endless sky pressing down, a constant reminder of her precarious state. Widows were often seen as burdens or worse, as fair game. Survival was a daily, exhausting war against nature and the prying eyes of a world that had little patience for weakness. Her errand was simple: fetch the last of the kindling from the small, leaning shed behind the barn. It was a drafty, forgotten structure, more hole than wall, but it offered some meager shelter for tools and wood. The snow had drifted high against its door, requiring a shoulder against the warped wood to push it open. Inside, the air was frigid, thick with the smell of damp earth and old sawdust. Moonlight, slivering through cracks in the roof, painted pale stripes across the rough floor. As her eyes adjusted, searching for the woodpile, she saw it. Not wood, a shape, curled tight against the far wall. Hidden amongst the shadows and forgotten sacks, was a girl. Small, no more than 10 or 11 winters, wrapped in rags, shivering uncontrollably. Eliza froze, her breath catching in her throat like a shard of ice. Fear, sharp and immediate, lanced through her. Who was she? How long had she been there? The girl's eyes, wide and dark in the dim light, stared back, holding a depth of terror and desperation that mirrored Eliza's own sudden panic. This wasn't just a trespasser. This was trouble. Discovery meant questions. Questions meant revealing her solitary, vulnerable state. Questions could lead to the farm being taken, her last link to Henry severed, leaving her utterly adrift in a world that offered no safety net. But the girl, she looked half-frozen, skeletal. Her small hands, blue with cold, were clutched together as if in prayer. Compassion warred with self-preservation. The pragmatist born of years of hardship whispered caution, warned of the immense risk. Harboring someone unknown, especially someone so clearly on the run, could cost Eliza everything. But the image of her own younger self, lonely and afraid after being orphaned, flashed in her mind. She remembered the gnawing hunger, the bone-deep chill of abandonment. The girl whimpered, a tiny, broken sound that cracked through Eliza's fear. It was not a sound of defiance or threat, but of utter, helpless misery. It stripped away the layers of fear and practicality, leaving only a raw, empathetic ache. She couldn't leave her there to die. Slowly, deliberately, Eliza took a step forward. The girl flinched, pressing herself tighter into the wall. "It's all right," Eliza said, her voice rough with disuse and emotion. "I won't hurt you." The words felt clumsy, inadequate against the palpable fear radiating from the small form. She knelt a few feet away, trying to appear non-threatening, her internal monologue a frantic tangle of "what am I doing?" and "I have to." The girl's eyes remained fixed on her, wary, assessing. The air in the shed grew heavier, charged with unspoken stories and desperate hope. The wind howled outside, a fitting soundtrack to the internal storm raging within Eliza. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her more than the winter air, that her life had just irrevocably changed. The stillness stretched between them, punctuated only by the girl's ragged breathing and the relentless shriek of the wind. The decision was made, not in a grand declaration, but in the quiet, dangerous act of kneeling before a frightened child in a frozen shed. She had opened her door, not just to the cold, but to an unknown future. The girl's name, she eventually whispered, was Sarah. It came haltingly, laced with a fear that suggested the name itself might be dangerous. She offered little else about her past, only vague, fragmented hints of a cruelty she had fled, a place she could never return to. Eliza didn't press. Some silences held more truth than words. She brought Sarah inside, guiding the trembling girl through the deep snowdrifts that marked the path to the small farmhouse. The warmth of the single-room cabin felt like a miracle after the shed, the small fire in the hearth casting dancing shadows that chased away some, but not all, of the girl's fear. Eliza gave her Henry's old coat, much too large but thick and warm, and a bowl of the meager stew she had managed to make last. Sarah ate as if she hadn't seen food in days, her small hands trembling as she held the spoon. Eliza watched, a knot of worry tightening in her stomach. How long could she keep this secret? How could she explain the sudden appearance of a child to the few neighbors who occasionally passed by, their eyes sharp with curiosity and suspicion? Survival had taught Eliza caution. Isolation had taught her self-reliance. Now, protecting this fragile life demanded a new kind of strength, one she wasn't sure she possessed. The days that followed settled into a tense, watchful routine. Sarah stayed hidden during the day, mostly silent, her presence a constant hum of anxiety beneath the surface of Eliza's forced calm. Eliza taught her small chores, quiet tasks that kept her occupied without drawing attention. They spoke little, a shared understanding growing in the quiet space between them, born of necessity and shared vulnerability. Sarah's trust was a fragile, precious thing, earned slowly with every shared meal, every quiet moment by the fire. Then there was Thomas. He owned the small plot of land bordering hers, a man as silent and weathered as the landscape itself. He kept to himself, rarely speaking unless it was absolutely necessary, his face a mask of stoic endurance. He had helped Henry with the fence once, and since Henry's passing, he would occasionally pass by on his way to the creek, his gaze distant. Eliza had always felt a flicker of unease under his steady, unreadable stare. Now, that unease sharpened into outright fear every time she saw him. Did he notice the extra smoke from her chimney? Could he tell there was another presence in her small home? One bitter afternoon, Thomas was mending a section of fence near the edge of her property, closer than he usually ventured. Sarah was inside, supposedly hidden, but the fear that she might make a sound, be glimpsed through a window, was a cold knot in Eliza's gut. Eliza went out, feigning needing to check the chickens, acutely aware of his proximity. She kept her head down, her movements deliberately normal, trying to project an air of quiet competence she didn't feel. As she passed within earshot, she felt his eyes on her. She braced herself for a question, a comment, anything that might require her to speak and risk betraying the secret. But he said nothing. He simply hammered a post deeper into the frozen earth, his movements economical and strong. When he finally straightened, he looked not at her, but out towards the horizon, where the gray sky met the white land in an endless, desolate line. He cleared his throat, a sound like stones grinding. "Hard winter," he rumbled, his voice low and rough. It wasn't a question, just a statement of fact. Eliza nodded, unable to manage more than a tight. He paused, then added, still not looking at her. Smoke looked steady. Good fire, it was the closest he had ever come to acknowledging her existence beyond a nod. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. Was it a question, a warning, or something else? She couldn't tell. She simply murmured, "Thank you," and hurried towards the chicken coop, her hands trembling. He stayed until the fence was mended, his presence a silent, unnerving weight. When he finally walked away, melting back into the vastness of the snow-covered fields, Eliza didn't know if she should feel relieved or more afraid. His silence was as potent and mysterious as the winter itself. The world outside Eliza's small farm grew more dangerous. Word travels slowly in the deep country, like molasses in winter, but it travels nonetheless. Whispers reached her, carried by the rare traveler or a passing neighbor, of a girl missing from a community some distance away. Descriptions were vague, but the age, the circumstances, running from a cruel situation, too closely matched the few details Sarah had let slip. Fear became a constant companion, a cold shadow clinging to Eliza's heels. She doubled down on caution, ensuring Sarah was never seen, not even a fleeting shadow at a window. Sarah, sensing the increased tension, became even more withdrawn, her eyes holding a hunted look that tore at Eliza's heart. One late afternoon, the sound of a horse approaching broke the silence. Eliza's blood ran cold. Visitors were rare, especially unannounced ones. She peeked through a crack in the curtain. Two men, rough-looking and unfamiliar, were dismounting near her gate. They weren't neighbors. They had the air of men who traveled, who asked questions. Her mind raced. Sarah was hidden in the small root cellar beneath the floorboards, but it wouldn't hold up to a determined search. There was no time to run, no time to think. The men walked towards the house, their boots crunching on the frozen snow. One of them called out, his voice loud and harsh. "Hello, the house! Anyone home?" Just as they reached the porch, another figure appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. Thomas. He emerged from behind the barn, walking slowly but purposefully towards the gate. The two men stopped, turning towards him, their hands pausing near their sides. Thomas didn't speak. He simply stood between them and the house, his posture radiating a quiet, unyielding presence. He carried no weapon, but his stillness, his weathered strength, seemed to hold them at bay. "Afternoon," one of the men said, his tone wary now. "Just asking after a missing girl. Seen anyone pass this way?" Thomas didn't reply immediately. He surveyed them with those unreadable eyes, his gaze lingering on their faces. The wind whipped around them, carrying snow crystals that stung the skin. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Eliza watched from the window, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She wanted to cry out, to tell Sarah to run, to somehow protect them both, but she knew any sound from inside would give them away. She clenched her fists, her knuckles white. This was it, the moment of truth. Finally, Thomas spoke. His voice was low, gravelly, carrying just far enough in the wind. "No one," he stated. "Not, no one I saw, or no one recent. Just a simple, absolute no one." He didn't offer an explanation, didn't ask who they were looking for, didn't invite further conversation. He just stood there, a silent, impassive barrier. The men exchanged glances. They seemed unsure how to proceed. Thomas wasn't overtly hostile, but his stillness was a form of resistance. His reputation as a solitary, capable man, though not widely known, carried weight in this isolated land. Challenging him felt unwise, perhaps dangerous, for reasons they couldn't quite articulate. After another moment of tense silence, the louder man shrugged. "Right then. Our mistake." They didn't look convinced, but they remounted their horses, casting suspicious glances back at the silent figure by the gate and the quiet house. They rode away, swallowed by the vast white emptiness. Eliza stayed by the window until they were long gone, the fear slowly receding, replaced by a stunned disbelief and a profound sense of gratitude. Thomas remained by the gate for a moment longer, watching the retreating figures, then turned and walked back towards his own land, disappearing as silently as he had arrived. He didn't look towards the house, didn't acknowledge Eliza in any way. His intervention was a silent, complete act. He had seen, he had understood, and he had chosen to protect them. The immediate threat receded like the tide, leaving behind a stillness that felt fragile but precious. Eliza remained by the window long after Thomas had gone, watching the empty space where the men had been. Her hands were still trembling, but not entirely from fear. There was a new warmth spreading through her, a sense of solidarity in this harsh, solitary world. Thomas, the silent, stoic neighbor, had chosen, in his quiet way, to stand with her. He had not spoken of what he saw, either the day Sarah arrived or the day he turned the men away. His protection was not offered with words, but with presence, with action. It was a bond forged in silence, stronger perhaps than any spoken promise. She went to the root cellar, lifting the heavy trapdoor. Sarah emerged, her face pale, her eyes wide with unshed tears. Eliza simply pulled her into a tight embrace, holding the small, trembling body close. The fear they had shared, the danger they had just escaped, had solidified the unspoken connection between them. They were no longer just a rescuer and the rescued, but two souls bound by circumstance and a shared vulnerability. The winter held its grip on the land, but the days slowly began to lengthen. Survival remained a struggle, the farm demanding endless, back-breaking work. But now Eliza did not face it alone. Sarah, no longer a ghost in the shadows, became a quiet, capable companion. She helped with chores, her small hands surprisingly adept. The fear in her eyes lessened, replaced by a quiet determination and a deep, unwavering loyalty to Eliza. The house, once filled with the silence of grief, now held the quiet sounds of shared life, soft footsteps, hushed whispers by the fire, the rhythm of two people working side by side. Thomas continued his solitary existence on the neighboring farm. He didn't speak of the events of that day. But sometimes Eliza would see him working near the boundary line, his gaze occasionally resting on her farm for a moment before returning to his task. There was no intrusion in his look, only a quiet, watchful presence. He had become, in his own silent way, a guardian of their fragile peace. Eliza looked at Sarah, her face illuminated by the warm glow of the hearth. The girl was sketching in the dirt floor with a stick, drawing the sturdy shape of a farmhouse. It wasn't a grand house, just a simple, solid structure, smoke rising from the chimney. It looked like their house. A wave of fierce protectiveness washed over Eliza. She had lost much, had faced despair and isolation that threatened to break her spirit. But in taking in this lost child, in facing the danger it brought, she had found a strength she never knew she possessed. Resilience, she realized, wasn't just about enduring the storm. It was about finding the quiet courage to offer shelter within it, to build a small corner of warmth and connection in a cold and indifferent world. It was in the steady presence of a silent neighbor, the tentative trust of a child, the slow, steady beat of a heart that had dared to choose compassion over fear. The future was uncertain, the hardships many, but Eliza knew they would face it together. The silence outside was still vast, but the silence within the house was no longer empty. It was filled with a quiet strength, a shared breath, the gentle, unspoken promise of resilience.